How many times have I done this? And I still hate it.
Halloween may have come and gone, but that doesn't mean it's time to give up on spooky games. Games that send chills up our spine and make us question what is real and what is a hallucination, and how we can avoid having our skin flayed from our bodies. And this game, I feel, perfectly encapsulates that feeling. A game where you're not only trying to survive, but the other denizens around you are as well. It's every man for himself, but risking your life to help someone else may benefit you in the long run. This game is The Suffering. The Suffering came out in 2004 on both Xbox and PlayStation 2, and I remember vaguely playing it around its launch time, but the details are pretty hazy. I remember it being pretty scary and full of terrifying monsters, but for the longest time, I couldn't even remember the title of the game. However, after looking through GOG's sale for Halloween, I found it. But upon doing some investigation, I found that there's actually a large amount of people that never got to play this gem. They never got to experience the horror that is running through a prison with monsters pulled straight out of a Silent Hill game, and having that horror survival component to stay alive and figure out what the hell is actually going on. So join me as we dive into the game to see if it lives up to the memories I have of it and see if it truly stands up to the horror survival genre or if it misses the mark completely. The game opens up with your main character Torque being brought into prison for the murder of his wife and children. It's some pretty heinous stuff, but considering your person only has flashbacks of the event makes me feel like he didn't have much to do with it, because even the details of the flashbacks are pretty hazy.
Nice to meet you, my name's Floyd.
Your character by this point already has a reputation when you get to the prison. Everyone is talking about how you're supposed to be some kind of super hardcore badass out on the street, and some of the people actually praise you as you come in, or start asking you details of what you can remember, because being on death row, there's not much else going on. I mean, hell, even the guards themselves know of the reputation that your character holds, and this paints a picture that you're an outcast from the very beginning. No one's going to be looking out for you, so you've got to look out for yourself. And this couldn't be more the point, because this game starts off on such an explosive note after you've been put into your cell, because creatures pulled straight out of the darkest depths of your nightmares start appearing and killing off the prisoners in some pretty horrific ways for a game that came out in 2004.
What the hell's going on?
Slick, what in the fuck just happened? Slick! Slick! Goose, you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. And it wasn't me. If that's what you're thinking, I didn't touch that.
What was that? Goose? For fuck's sake, what's going on?
We forgive those who trespass against.
That was close. I thought we were done for. We gotta get out of this shit can before it collapses. Shit. There's something in here. It's in here! Help me! No!
Your cell gets broken, and now you're left to your own devices to try and make it out of the prison. But this won't be an easy feat at all. As you play through the game, you can come into contact with surveillance cameras that show you extra hallways or rooms, and it doesn't look like anybody else is faring any better than you are. When you make it deeper into the prison and come across more people fighting for survival, it seems clear that this wasn't an accident. It seems that Torque himself is being goaded and prodded to unleash his inner murderous instincts. You'll start to see this because Hermes, a ghastly apparition, torments some of the prisoners as you get close. Horus, an undead human strapped into an electric chair with electric properties, will close off doors or block pathways. And then you have Dr. Killjoy, which is as much of a serial killer as you can actually get, tries to explain to Torque the best method to killing somebody. And eventually, you'll get to a room where all three of these characters will instigate and egg on Torque to let go and fully embrace his murderous side. and this is when he turns into a hideous abomination capable of causing so much devastation and havoc upon anyone that gets in the way. Inmates, wardens, or creatures alike. But it all comes at a cost.
Early adolescence. Ever wonder what happens during those blackouts? Would you say you have visions of bloodshed? Yes, surely there is bloodshed. That's it, we've been waiting
For if you use it too long, it'll start to drain your health, and while in this form, you're not able to use healing items, so it's kind of a high risk, high reward. You'll deal a ton of damage on one side, but if you get into a bad spot, you're almost certainly asking for death. But once you've learned this skill, the game really lets you off the leash. From here you'll be able to explore the prison and island it inhabits, and even interact with some of the inmates and guards that are still left alive. Helping them out not only gives you a little bit more details to what's going on from their perspective, but a lot of the time they'll either give you supplies or tips, or even aid you in an area with a bunch of creatures.
You going to kill me too? Come on and make kill me, I dare you.
As you make your way through the prison, this is when the survival horror aspect really comes into play. You'll come into contact with weapons dropped by prisoners and guards alike, whether it's the pistols, the shotguns, or even a freaking Tommy gun. But unlike other horror games, ammo is aplenty, which means you don't have to conserve like you would in a Resident Evil type game. And that's a good thing, because some of these monsters can take quite a punch. But instead of just being bullet sponges, if you take the time to aim at a certain location on a monster, you can actually sever limbs, making some of those faster enemies miss more often, or if you manage to take off the head, the enemies will start to attack their own allies in confusion. However, you don't have to be the best shot to have this happen, because some of the monsters you'll encounter also have beef with some of the other creatures, and it's not uncommon to come into a room full of enemies and find them both attacking each other. This really helps out in some of the smaller areas with some of the different creature types, because instead of going after you, they'll fight for you. Now, what would a good horror survival game be without a good atmosphere? Well, you'd get another Resident Evil 5. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about that because the suffering brings the ambience of being locked in a prison with murderous entities to life in such a way that I feel like horror titles today should take note. Whether it's the sound of your footsteps bouncing off of the cinder block walls, the way the light flickers down dark hallways, or even having hulking monsters rush past you as you turn a corner. All of this culminates into a constant looking over your shoulder to make sure you're not being chased down, and a feeling of dread as you're trying to make your way out of the prison and coming into contact with a ton of people that have not, whether by your hand or other.
Pick up the phone, T.
Even with the overall tone of this game, this is taken one step further because Torque himself will have visions or flashbacks as he comes into contact with his dead family, all throughout the prison. So imagine turning a corner running away from enemies, and now you see your wife and kids inside cells, asking why you weren't there to protect them. It happens just enough and in the right moments that it really makes you question if what you're doing is right. Mix this in with the fact that sometimes in key locations you can even see past events before shit hit the fan, and you really start to see the prison for what it is. Nothing good has happened here, and nothing ever will. Now, of course, in a horror survival game, especially when you have higher entities pulling the strings, you're going to encounter boss fights. Except these aren't bosses in the traditional sense of shoot it till it's dead, except for one at the end, which is arguably the worst boss of the game. These bosses rely on a theme to take them down, whether you're turning off electricity, breaking movie reels as they project your assailants, or shoving a ghost into a furnace. Now, for everything right this game does when it comes to horror and action, there was one major issue for me, and that was the constant crashing. I recorded the game in hour-long intervals, and during that hour, I would experience 3 to 5 crashes each, sometimes 7, and sometimes none. Resetting tons of progress, and towards the end of the game, after every single encounter or set piece, I would save hoping to not have to restart a huge section. I played around with the visual settings, tried everything else I could think of, but it seems like the crashing was random. But, putting all that aside, I'm pleased to say that besides the graphic limitations of the time, the crashing, and some of the missions where you'd help an inmate seeming impossible, the game played and ran really well. It captured that feeling of being in a place of familiarity and flipping it upside down in a realistic way that had me hooked the entire time. I'm eager to check out the sequel at a later date and see if it lives up to the bar that this game set. But for this game only being $10 on GOG, it's worth every cent and worth the time if you're willing to give it.
Guess it's your lucky day, huh? Jesus, you look like you've really been through hell.
Somebody's missing from this picture, T. I don't want us to ever be apart again. Love always, Carmen.